So good morning, folks, and welcome to the February 2018 PMI Certification Chat. My name is Andrea Brockmeyer, and I'll be your moderator today. And I have been long involved in certification in terms of development of materials and resources that people have used to pass PMI certification exams, including the PMP, ACP, and PBA. So we've got, we do these Q&A sessions each month, and I usually have something that I put together trying to stay on top of what's going on with changes at PMI. And there's lots going on right now, and also to give you an opportunity to ask questions that you have. So we've got some upcoming prep courses there. We've got a PMP certification class coming up February 6th, and that is live, live online. That shouldn't say online, actually. That is live in person, so typo there on that one, starting February 6th. And so let me just, this is not online. This one is in Bloomington, Minnesota. Our next PBA course is starting February 12th. That is virtual, live online. And so that runs Monday, Tuesday, February 12, 13, and then Monday, Tuesday, February 19, 20. And our ACP prep class also starts coming up April 10th, and that is virtual and online. So all of our certification courses provide all of the contact hours that you need in order to qualify to sit for any of those exams. So, and there are anytime learning options available for those to allow you to do that in a self-paced format. So, and then you will get copies of these slides today in a follow-up email after our time together. So we offer have offers for folks that sign up and attend our chats, and so you'll get some discounts for some resources that you may be interested in, so watch your email for those. All right, and some resources for you to make note of. And again, there's actually a copy of this available in your webinar there of these slides. And again, you'll get a link to this as well after our session. So just some things that may be helpful for you. In particular, that link to the exam updates is a handy link to kind of keep an eye on notifications from PMI. And so I would check that out. And also there are some webinar recordings there at the bottom that you see that go over some things that may be specific to a particular exam that you're interested in. They go into a little more detail maybe than what we even cover here today, or just a different presentation that you might find helpful. So just kind of a collection of things that may be helpful for you there. All right, so here's what I've got on my, looks like a really lengthy list of topics. It is kind of a lengthy list. That's not to say, though, it's going to take a super long time. So, but these are the things that I would like to cover, or think that in anticipation of what might be helpful to you, these are the things that I'm thinking about covering today. So, upcoming exam changes, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about how PMI exams are developed. I think that's very helpful for people to understand, because I think there's a lot of, there's different thoughts out there as to what drives changes to exams, and, you know, what are the, you know, how significant are exam changes going to be. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I've put together my thoughts about what you need to know, or what to use, what resources to use based on which version of an exam that you're taking. Just kind of put it all together, because I think that'll be helpful for folks. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the CAPM pilot that I think is a really good opportunity for folks that might be interested in that. And then I want to just talk a little bit about PMBOK 6th Ed, some highlights on that, and thoughts about how to approach the 6th Ed. And then just a comment about the PBA and the new PMI Guide to Business Analysis. share the most recent certification numbers that I have, and then I've got a top 10 study tips list for you. Now, these are the things I want to cover, but if you've got questions along the way, this is for you. So send them in the chat box there, and I will answer as they come through, and to make this as useful for you as possible. All right, so some important dates, and this is a screen that I am checking regularly because it's got all the info that people are most interested in as it relates to these exams. So the one that I'm watching right now is right here, is when is that PBA exam going to be updated? And as of today, that's what we got, is Q2. So they don't have a final date yet on that. Usually, typically, it's 6 months after the release of a new standard, and that was released, the business analysis guide was released in November, so I suspect it's going to be end of Q2. I mean, they could come back and say, you know, it's going to be in April or whatever, but I think with each passing day that we don't have a date, it's going to get pushed out a little more. It's not typical that they would just spring a date on folks without some good advance notice. So that's the date that I am watching in particular. And then the others here that are of particular note is this one right there, and that's for both the PMP and the ACP, March 26th. And then the CAPM is changing on, it's actually the new one will be released on May 21st. So the May 21st is the first day of the new exam there. So those are some dates that may be of particular interest. All right. So the one thing I want to just make sure people understand, and I think this just can be helpful in terms of people getting a sense for, you know, what are the expectations around these exam changes. And I think part of that is understanding how PMI develops their exams. And something to keep in mind is that PMI certifications are not based on books. So people say, you know, the PMP is a PMBOK, you know, you have to memorize the PMBOK and it's a PMBOK exam. It's true that the project management body of knowledge is, the guide to the project management body of knowledge is a key resource, but the PMP exam is not an exam on that book any more than the PBA is an exam on the practice guide or the guide to business analysis. They are role-based tests. They are role-based certifications. Now, the one exception is the CAPM, the Certified Associate in Project Management, which is specifically based on the PMBOK guide. Okay, so that's the one test where you don't earn PDUs. If you want to keep that exam, you have to take the test again because they have a new test to reflect the new PMBOK edition. Okay, so this is important, I think, to understand. So if it's not based on a document or a book, what is it based on? Well, the key driver in a PMI exam is what's called a role delineation study. And what they do is they get a committee together and they go out and they look at what people in a particular field, business analysis or project management, what do they do? What skills do they need to have? What kinds of things do they do in that role? Okay, and they do this periodically, about every 4 years or so, because it changes, right? You think of what did project managers do 10, 20, 30 years ago? What do they do today? It's different. It evolves. So they go out and they take a look at that. And from that, then they put together what's called an exam content outline, or an ECO. This is actually the blueprint for the exam. This is what they use as the springboard for developing exam questions. So they have domains. They have these you know, domains of skills that are required, and then they have various tasks, people that do things that they do inside each of those domains. So that's where you actually see the identification of what practitioners in a particular field need to know and what they need to be able to do in that role. That's what the test is based on. Then what they do is they go to the standards and the guides, such as the PMBOK or a practice guide or a standard, those that they publish and those in the field at large. So again, the PMBOK guide is the project management body of knowledge. It's the guide to the body of knowledge. It's not, they're not saying that this is the be-all, end-all, every word in the discipline of project management as an example. It's a guide to the good practices in project management. But they go out to those standards and they make sure that the exam is consistent in the terms of the use of terminology, and that the questions are based in the profession's typical use of the terms and concepts in that body of knowledge. So that's really where the standards come in and the guides. And from that, then they put the exam together. So those are the drivers in developing a PMI exam, which means that in fact the biggest driver in a change to an PMI exam is not a change in the PMBOK, but actually it's a change in the RDS and the ECO. That's where you're going to see the biggest changes. So, which is not to say that the PMBOK may not have, doesn't have some bearing on the exam, but it's not the biggest driver. Okay, so we've got a bunch of changes coming up here. So what I put together here is to think about when is the RDS or ECO going to be updated? Is it going to be updated? When does the exam change? And then what key resources do you want to use for the current exam, and what key resources would you use if you're going to wait and take the new exam? So for the PMP, the RDS and the ECO are not getting updated. Okay, so the exam, though, is changing to reflect the 6th edition of the PMBOK, March 26th. March 26th will be the new version of the exam. Bear in mind, if you take the exam between now and March 26th, you will be taking the exam based on the 5th edition. Effective Monday, March 26th, you will take the 6th edition. So even if, and I just saw this question posted online recently, even if you take, let's say you take the exam on March 23rd and you fail, and you take it again on March 26th, will you be taking the 5th edition or the 6th edition? You'll be taking the 6th edition. It is a hard and fast date. There is no grandfathering in of folks to take the 5th edition. All exams, PMP exams administered March 26th will be the 6th edition. That's how all of their exams are. So there is no, if you fail, then you get to take the same version that you took the first time. That doesn't work like that. So key resources, if you're going to take it between now and March 25th, you want to use the current ECO, the 5th edition of the PMBOK, and Watermark course materials. If you're going to take it March 26th or after, you're going to use the same ECO and the 6th edition of the PMBOK and our course materials we'd recommend, and those will be updated. And we are looking at probably, right now, probably, I would say Q2, possibly Q3 for release of updated materials. So, and there are application worksheets that you can take a look at to help you capture the experience and education that you need in order to apply for the exams. And I've got that there at the bottom for all of these. Now, I'm going to jump over to the ACP, and that RDS and ECO are also not scheduled for update right now. And that exam is changing on the same date. So the resources that you're going to use for that exam would be the ECO, and the exam content outline. It's free. You get it on PMI's website. Just click on the certifications tab at the top and then pick your exam, and on the right margin you will see a link to the exam content outline. Absolutely, people need to use that when you're studying. I think it's an underutilized resource when prepping for a PMI exam. But what you'll use then is the PMI Agile Practice Guide, and that was released this past fall, and it's a great resource. And even though the exam isn't, you know, it was out before the exam changed, go ahead and use it. It's a good resource. There's nothing in it that's going to conflict with, you know, the current version of the exam, and So whether it's before or after March 26th, I would still advise using that. And then our course materials. And then if you're going to take the new version, same thing. And our course materials are likely to be ready for that new exam release date, March 26th. Now the PBA, the big question here is I'm waiting to hear about RDS ECO updates, because I had heard last year, I was told by PMI that it was going to be updated, and now they are saying they don't know, or not necessarily. It kind of depends. So we're waiting to see on the exam date change, but also I really am wanting to see what they're going to do about the RDS and ECO. So if you are taking the current version of the PBA exam, you want to use the ECO, our study guide, and the PMI-BA practice guide, and our course materials. If you're going to take the exam whenever the new exam comes out, whenever that is, you'll use whatever version of the ECO they've got at that time, and then our study guide, which will be updated, and our PMI guide to business analysis, or the PMI guide to business analysis, which is essentially the same thing for business analysis that the PMBOK is to project management, and our course materials. And our course materials will be updated soon as we find out more about the date there. Our materials should be updated and ready to go pretty close to that date. And then our application worksheet also will be helpful for capturing experience and education that you need for that. And then the CAPM, they updated their RDS ECO October 2017, and that was to reflect changes to the that role. And that exam date change is May 20th, and again, it's actually May 21st. That would be the first day. May 21st is a Monday. That'll be the first day of the new exam. And so if you're taking the exam before then, you'll use ECO 5th Ed and PMBOK 5th Ed. If you're taking the exam after that, you'll use the new ECO and the new PMBOK. So that kind of captures everything there, hopefully in one place, to kind of give you some guidance there. So regarding the CAPM, I think this is a great opportunity. If you know somebody who is new to project management, or maybe you're new to project management, you don't have the experience to sit for the PMP, I think the CAPM is a great certification for folks, and it's good for 5 years. And then the idea is that you then take those 5 years and get the experience that you need to sit for the PMP. But they have a pilot period that they are offering where you can take the exam for a greatly discounted at a greatly discounted rate. So if you take it between March 12th and March 30th, you pay $90 for that. If you take it between March 31st and May 20th, you pay $180 for members, $240 for non-members. And so this is it's a pilot period, and they often do this. Not just PMI, other organizations as well will have a pilot period for a new exam, where they get the results from folks, and then they calibrate the results, and they figure out what the curve needs to look like. What is going to be a passing grade? How did people perform? And so you can participate that and take it at a discounted rate. So it would be based on the new ECO and the new the 6th edition of the PMBOK. The only bummer about this is that you get your rebate 2 or 3 weeks after the pilot period ends, and also you have to wait till May 28th to get your exam results. So as opposed to other PMI tests where you get your results right away, you got to wait a little while. So if you can stand the wait, I think this is a really good opportunity. It's kind of low risk in terms of financially. So so food for thought on that. I think that's a really great opportunity. So I wanted to talk then next a little bit about some of the changes in the PMBOK 6th Ed. So what they've done, they've added some sections for each knowledge area. So the number of process groups and the knowledge areas, that has not changed. There's been some reorganization of how some tools are grouped and things like that. But what they've done is they've added at the beginning of each knowledge area, at the beginning of the chapter, several sections. Okay, so one of the sections, and these are small, they're not like pages and pages. It's a couple, maybe 3 paragraphs. So one section is they label trends and emerging practices. So what are the things that they're seeing in the field? And this is not like, oh my gosh, didn't know, or these are, totally, had no idea about this kind of stuff. It's just, kind of keeping their finger on the pulse of what's going on out there. So things like cost management. So there's a lot of issues actually with earned value. So there's another tool called Earn Schedule. So that's something that they're suggesting as a trend or an emerging practice. Things like in the area of HR management or what's now called resource management, self-organizing teams. In procurement, seeing very large projects with huge procurement budgets and using lots of contractors and international standards for contract forms and things like that. In stakeholder management, this is something that actually comes through a lot in a variety of places, but this wider view of who's involved in stakeholder identification and whose job is it really to engage stakeholders, a much more collaborative approach among stakeholders in doing that. So things, just as examples, those are the kinds of things that they identify. And then tailoring considerations. So, in previous versions of the PMBOK, they say all of these things need to be tailored, and the team has to decide which of these processes you use and how robust they need to be. And you kind of read that over and over again. So now they've called out this tailoring section. And what are some of the considerations that go into tailoring the processes in this knowledge area, right? So integration, what's the development approach? Are we going to do agile? Are we going to do traditional or waterfall or some sort of combination? In terms of scope management, how much certainty is there around the requirements? How likely are they to change? Risk management, how big is the project? Is it, specific to an area? Is it enterprise-wide? How complex is it? What's the urgency around it? Things that we already, if you've been around this stuff, you do this. These are things that you think about, but they just call it out in these sections. And then there's considerations for agile and adaptive environments. So what is the impact of uncertainty around, say, risk management processes or resource management processes or quality management processes? Are there benefits to, or what are the thoughts around chunking work, breaking it down, transparency, having regular inspections or reviews, collaboration, those kinds of things. So again, it's nice. It's just things to think about that preface each of the knowledge area chapters, or that are in the initial part of the chapters. So when you look at this PMBOK 6 set, it's huge. It's 756 pages, and the bummer is that the pages are really thin. They're like like hymnal pages, and they're gray as a means of protecting their IP. They have this the pages are such that if you photocopy them or you make copies of them, it says do not copy on there. So they're protecting their material with this technology that makes the pages gray. So it's not only 756, but it's 756 difficult to read or unpleasant to read pages. So one of the things you can do is break it down, is think about the different sections, and rather than just sitting down at page 1 and just this daunting behemoth of a document, break it down a little bit and take a look at the different parts. So part 1 includes the introduction, the environment, the role of the PM, and all the knowledge areas. So it's the vast majority of the PMBOK. But you may not want to start there. You may want to take a look at part 2, which is called the standard. And this has always been how the PMBOK's been organized, but I think there's more incentive than ever to perhaps explore different ways of digesting this. So this starts on page 539, and it includes some high-level concepts, and it organizes the processes by process group. So the knowledge area, of course, has the processes organized by, integration, scope, time, cost, etc. The exam, the PMP exam, is organized by process group. So this is helpful. Even if you don't start here, you're going to want to kind of go through and read these and think about it in terms of by process group. And what it does is it goes by the processes and includes the benefit of the process, which is a great way to think about them. Why do we do these things? And the inputs and outputs. So there are no tools and techniques in this section. So it just flows a little better. It's easier to understand what it is you're supposed to be doing without all the distraction of the tools and techniques. At some point you need to get it, you need to deal with the tools and techniques. But for a first pass, you might think about starting here. And then again, you're going to want to go back to this, I think, after you've been through the first part as well. And yes, you will get a link with a copy to the slides after the presentation, absolutely. And then the third part, there's some really good stuff in the part 3, which is the appendices, glossary, and index. So Appendix X1 has the 6th edition changes. What are the changes from 5th to 6th edition? So, not if the 6th edition is your first experience with the PMBOK, you don't need to get into it. It doesn't really matter what the changes are. You'd never get tested on that. But it's kind of interesting to read through it to understand that inputs yield output. Inputs result in outputs, and that inputs are from outputs unless they come from outside the project. So the idea being that you should be able to get some understanding of sequence of these things, just from the idea that, outputs create inputs and inputs then come from outputs of other processes. So there are some rules around that that can be interesting. And then the X 1.11 to 1.22 identifies the changes from the previous edition for each knowledge area. And again, I don't know that you need to distract yourself with that if you're trying to test on the 6th edition. That you're not going to be tested on changes in the PMBOK. For those that are just trying to understand what the changes are, that's pretty handy. Then there are there's Appendix X3, which talks about the implications of the type of project approach for each process group. So this is really helpful because you need to think like this. So for the PMP exam, this knowledge area construction, or thinking about these processes by knowledge area, is handy for studying purposes, but it's kind of artificial in terms of practice. That's why the exam is organized by process group, because the knowledge areas are things that we know something about, knowledge, know something about. The process groups are things that we do. And it's a test on how to apply the good practices in project management. So it's a good way, this appendix, is to think about, okay, this project approach, what implications does that have for how we initiate, plan, execute, control, and close projects? So Appendix 4, X4, takes all of those key concepts that I talked about, which preface or are at the beginning of each knowledge area, puts them all together. So that's cool. So what are the key concepts in integration, scope, time, cost? They're all consolidated there. That's handy. X5 is the tailoring considerations. So again, what are all those tailoring considerations that they have at the beginning of each chapter in part 1? They're all together. So again, you can see where that would be kind of handy to maybe read these first, a little easier to digest, and then when you go back to part 1 and all 539 pages, it's a little familiar already. And then Appendix X6 is tools and techniques, and they've got a table to show where all the tools are used. It identifies where the tool is defined, and then just where it's referenced, because the tools get used in more than one process. So this is really handy. I think this is not only handy for purposes of studying, but it's also handy when you're using the PMBOK as a reference. So that's I think that's good. So then the PMI-PBA changes are going to be substantial. This is going to be, that's why I'm curious again about, what are they going to do about an RDS-CCO update? Is there going to be one or not? I'm very interested to see. But we do have the new PMI Guide to Business Analysis. So whereas project management has the project management body of knowledge, in the PMI world, business analysis has the PMI Guide to Business Analysis. Why didn't they call it the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge? Because the International Institute of Business Analysis already has published the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge. So they own the BABOK. So PMI called theirs the PMI Guide to Business Analysis. If you have trouble keeping the names of these documents apart, just know that those of us that deal with this stuff every day have trouble keeping the names of all these documents apart sometimes. So at any rate, right now what we have is the BA Practice Guide, the Business Analysis Practitioner's Guide. Actually, the actual full title being the Business Analysis for Practitioners, a Practice Guide. And that's what we're using as a key resource for the current PMI-PBA, along with our Watermark Learning study guide. But with the new exam coming out Q2, now we've got this document. So this is very organized, very similarly to the PMBOK. So those that are already familiar with the PMBOK, this is going to seem very similar. You've got 35 processes, 6 knowledge areas, 6 process groups. You've got processes with inputs, tools, and outputs. So this is going to be familiar territory for folks already familiar with the PMBOK. And if you're not familiar with it, that's okay. It really does make for perhaps not scintillating reading, but it's pretty logical how it's organized, and it's very repetitive, and so you really get a sense of these processes and how they're organized. So that is going to be the new document. Of course, you get a copy free as a member of PMI, e-copy that is. This does not have the dreadful gray pages. The pages are a little thicker, and it's not as long of a document. It's only 444 pages, including the index and all of the appendices. So it's a much more user-friendly hard copy document. All right. And then, I was looking for a more recent, I've only got numbers of certification holders through the end of the year, and I was kind of hoping to get a more, we get these every month, but we didn't receive it, but not that it's that different. But I just like to track numbers of people with certifications, and just to monitor growth in the different certifications. And so you can see that there is, there continues to be growth. We're over 800,000 PMPs in the world now, and that's pretty significant. But the numbers that I think are particularly interesting, you look at the number of PBAs, that number is growing. I think that number is going to continue to grow. There is just a increasingly, and not even sustained interest in the work of business analysis. And project managers, you guys are doing BA work, whether you realize it or not. And so I think that that is going to continue to grow. And the ACP, I think that's going to continue to grow. Those are the two that grow, that are growing at the fastest rate. So that's what I've got on that. Some people just like tracking that stuff. I kind of like watching those. So at any rate, so here's a pop quiz question for you. What is more fun than studying for a PMI exam? Anybody? 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 Everything. Everything is more fun than studying for a PMI exam. Laundry is more fun than studying for a PMI exam. So my advice to anybody looking at doing this is to do a little something every single day, every 7 days of the week, every 24-hour period, one thing for each little box on the calendar. Even if it's just 5 minutes of looking at flashcards or writing something down or reading a page, just something, because there are everything is more interesting and enjoyable than studying for this. So you just have to keep at it, and some days are harder than others, but even just a little bit, or it's just too easy for it to get away from you. So that is my pop quiz question for you. All right, so the PMI certification top prep tips. Number 1, did I mention do some kind of prep every day, a little something every day. Plan to commit. Now this says at least 40 hours at a minimum to prepping. So, people say, how long should I, study? Well, I would say, plan on at least 40 hours after a class to studying. Some people say they spend, well over 100 hours. The trick is there's a point of diminishing return. You're looking at either passing or failing. So you could study 500 hours, but at some point it isn't, you need enough to pass. So until you feel really comfortable with the material, you really kind of have a sense for what it is you're supposed to be doing. It's a little different for everybody, so there isn't a hard and fast number there, but it's a substantial investment. Read the PMBOK guide, practice guide, or any other resources at least once. So it's always amazing to me when somebody says, oh, well, I took the PMP exam and I didn't read the PMBOK and it just didn't go so well. And I say, well, yeah, I guess I'd start with that. So while it's true that the exams are not based on those documents, you need to read them to understand, kind of how do they think? How do they present things? If nothing else, just to get the language. Number 4, supplement study with our study guide for the PMI-PBA. So we've got our PBA study guide that will be very helpful. There are other resources from our courses that are also helpful. Study one chapter, domain, or knowledge area at a time and then do drills. So you can take, one section, kind of focus on that and use multiple resources to focus on one area and then do drills. And so you can do that with any of the tests, and I think that can be really helpful. And then, as a way of towards the end of your studies, then you can kind of take more of the horizontal perspective and focus across all the different areas or domains or knowledge areas. Use our flashcards if you get them from a class with us, or create flashcards as you go through your materials. So a stack of blank recipe cards can be really handy, and just as you're going through things, write down a concept, and on the other side, write down what it means, or definitions, or models, or whatever. It's a great way to remember things. And then you've got it, and you can take it with you when you're sitting at the bus stop, or sitting at, watching your kids' recital or hockey game or whatever, and just have your cards with you. After reading all resources, practice doing simulations or mix of questions. So get some studying done and then take those full simulations, which are on our online study exam that come with our certification prep courses, or you can buy them online. It's the full 200 questions or 120 questions. They take a long time though, so if you can't do that, there are options for taking mix of questions. Keep studying until you score well into the 80% on practice tests. So you want to keep at it until you're doing that. Practice your brain dump. So everybody talks about the brain dump. When the exam starts, you'll get an opportunity to do a brain dump of some concepts, maybe equations, terms, things that will help you remember things. So practice that so you can do it as quickly as possible. And it's a way of studying as well. And then get plenty of rest before your exam. So try not to go in fatigued. And breathe. That's always good testing advice as well. All right. So, questions, thoughts, comments, anybody? Okay. All right. Well, again, you'll get a link to the presentation and these slides after today, after we hang up here. So thank you very much for spending your time with me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you.